This is Mrs. O'Neill for Chapter 9, Section 1, Part 4. These are just the practice problems. I want to make sure that you understand how to name and write just the ions. This is going to help you be familiar with metals that have a single charge, metals that have multiple charges, your nonmetals that you have to change your ending to IDE, and those polyatomic ions, which most of them are negatively charged. Most of them end in ate or ite, but there's still some of those goofball ones, right? Like ammonium has a +1 charge, and cyanide and hydroxide end in ide, even though they're polyatomic ions. So the more you're familiar with the parts of a compound and the ion names they form and the charges, it's going to be a lot easier to deal with the next section. And in the next section, now we're going to kind of combine everything. We're going to talk about how to name and write ionic compounds for binary compounds. Those are just going to contain 2 elements. How about those metals with multiple charges? Again, are we going to know how to write those chemical compounds, and are we going to know how to name them? And also compounds with polyatomic ions. So again, I gave you like a preview and hopefully an understanding of how we're going to deal with metals and nonmetals, polyatomic ions, all of those things, but next section is going to be bringing everything together. So you can do this in a couple of different ways. First of all, you should have that chart of ions that are at the end of your packet. Make sure to have that out. And you might even want to have a real periodic table out as well. Again, just so you're familiar with where those elements are, because in the future, you might not have that ion sheet because now you know the ions so well. So, a couple of things you can do. Either you can try the first 6 and then play the video to get the answers. You can do all, I believe there's 18 of them. You can do all 18 and then check your answers. You can do 1 or 2 and then check your answers. It is up to you. But you got to be able to give the formula for the names I give you, or give me the name of the ion formula I give you. Again, these are going to be the parts of a compound. So all of your positive ions are going to be the first part of an ionic compound, and your negative ions are always going to be the second part of your ionic compound. So again, the more familiar you are with the parts and how to name them and how to deal with them, the easier next section is going to be when we really put them together as chemical formulas. Okay, so pause, do a few or do them all, and then check your answers. So hopefully at this point you pause the video. You can hopefully name any of the ion formulas I gave you, and you can give me the ion formula for any of the ion names I gave you. So I'm just going to kind of click through, and if there's something that you did get wrong, what I would strongly suggest you do is either put a question mark, highlight it, circle it. Make sure that you let me know that for whatever reason this one's really goofy or confusing for you, and if that's the problem, or if there's an issue there, you can talk to me in class or one of your other classmates. So I'm just going to kind of click through. So at this point, if you got all of these right, great. If there's something that you got wrong, do you understand why you got it wrong? And if you don't, then make sure to ask me in class. So I'm going to point some things out to you. So in other words, this "ide," remember, I know it's "ide" ending, but it's considered, it's cyanide, and that's a polyatomic ion. It is not a nonmetal. Copper, remember you had 2 choices, and on your ion sheet they gave you 2 choices because of the 2 different charges. So make sure that you remember that the +2 is going to have the Roman numeral of 2. Hydrogen sulfate, again, that's your polyatomic ion. I guess there's not really anything else I can say except for, again, nitrogen changes to nitride as a nonmetal. It is not one of your polyatomic ions, right? Because it is a single element with a charge. All right, can you do these next 6? Hopefully you either did them all already or you paused and did these 6. So now let's see if you got them right. And And I did them one by one, but now definitely pause. Make sure that you have the correct answers. Again, think of things like Ide should be a nonmetal. 8 is probably a polyatomic ion. And your gold and your tin need those Roman numerals because they have multiple charges. All right, last 6. Hopefully you paused and you got these answers by now. So just a reminder, I gave you these 3 to make sure you're understanding. Chlorine by itself would change to chloride, and I wanted to make sure you are paying attention to how many oxygens are in that polyatomic ion. The 3 with chlorine is 8, but the 2 is ite, and the 1 is hypoite. So again, you have your ion sheet. Just make sure that you're using it correctly. And zirconium, I gave that one to you because I want to make sure you're understanding, even though it's part of those transition metals, not all transition metals need those Roman numerals. It's only the ones that have multiple charges. And there's a handful of metals in there that only contain a single charge, and then you just name it like you would name any other metal, like in groups 1 and 2. All right, are you ready for a quiz that kind of takes on all of this section? So pause, read, and can you come up with an A, B, C, or D answer? Hopefully that makes sense. How about number 2? So did you come up with letter A, B, C, or D? Hopefully you came up with letter A, and that makes sense. And lastly, hopefully you paused, you read, and you came up with B as your answer. Remember, most of those polyatomic ions are negative anions, except for that ammonium. All right, hopefully that all makes sense. And now next section, now we're going to start putting these pieces of the compounds together.